I started what became Prime Video, Prime Gaming, Amazon's App Store. All of these are fine commercial products. None of them really help people. 2 different times I've had big demo failures in front of Jeff Bezos when I was relatively new to Amazon. And my demo was a disaster in front of literally the whole company.
Things you aspire to do, and once you get them, they might not be the same, like all that glitters is not gold.
Bigger house, second house, bigger boat, private jet. That was a treadmill that was never going to end.
How did you decide to switch away from the career of a vice president at Amazon to shifting outwards and starting something new from your scratch?
Because I was happy to roll out of bed, put on a nice shirt, spend time trying to help others.
For listeners listening to this, they are having a good job, a big tech job. They're earning well, but they still want more.
If you want to do something else, you don't have to cold turkey jump from I'm a corporate leader, I'm a software developer, I'm a marketer, straight to I'm this, independent person doing this other thing. People who've gotten far by being hardworking and reliable don't realize that.
Hello and welcome everyone to the Inner Scorecard podcast. This is your host Nikhil Kapai, currently on a break from Amazon, enjoying hosting this podcast and enjoying life in Prague. Before we get into today's conversation, please go hit subscribe. This subscription means a lot to us and helps us support the channel. Thank you. Starting the podcast in 3, 2, 1, let's go. So Ethan, you've had a life which most people aspire to have. You have, been in the engineering when there was the whole .com bubble, and then you became a vice president at Amazon. There's always been a high. And then after even retirement from Amazon, you still you posted about making $1 million a year, which a lot of people can just dream of. But there's also been a lot of downsides. You posted publicly about being laid off twice, being fired twice, one within days of adopting a new baby. And then I think you posted about a CEO having an affair with your wife and going through divorce. So there have been highlights. There have been lowlights. Ethan, tell me that one thing to understand who you really are. If I take away one experience or one skill away from you, and you would most definitely not make it to who you are today, what would be that one thing?
I think the one skill or trait I have that has made a huge difference is when something has gone wrong, I don't turtle up and get ashamed, or some things have happened to me, making big public mistakes, having large setbacks that I know other people would have quit. One example of that is twice, and I've shared these stories, 2 different times I've had big demo failures in front of Jeff Bezos. One was in front of when I was relatively new to Amazon. My demo misbehaved in front of the Amazon all hands. So I was relatively new to the company. I'd been there just over a year, and my demo was a disaster in front of literally the whole company. And I know a lot of people, I've seen people have something like that, and they figure my career is over, I'm leaving. For whatever reason, I'm just like, yeah, it went wrong, but it doesn't hold me back. I just work harder to fix it and move forward. And that's been enough of a pattern, making mistakes and then recovering from them, that I think if I had lessened my ambition or quit or spent a lot of time wallowing in, oh, what a huge disaster, it would have completely changed my career, because it would have been over and over at different places. And so I think the one takeaway is, yes, you will have big mistakes, but most people get over those if you don't act like it's the end of your world.
Said that VPs are so disconnected that you kind of gave a perspective from a VP lifestyle. Talk to me about your own self. Like, when did you realize that the VP lifestyle or the disconnect was not worth it for you? When did the PJs or the private jets, as you mentioned the lingo that they use, that was very, very funny to me. Like, when did you realize that this disconnect, just going down that trajectory, was not worth it for you?
Well, I guess a couple things. First, I realized there's always going to be someone with more money. So if you were chasing equality, you were going to be on a treadmill, bigger house, second house, bigger boat, private jet, as you mentioned. And, I was working with people like Bezos who were billionaires. That was a treadmill that was never going to end. So part of it was, you've probably heard there are two ways to be wealthy. One is to have more money, and the other is to be happy with less. So I started looking at what does it mean to be happy with less, particularly when my version of less is not very little. I already have a very nice life. How much more did I need to add to it? I think the second piece of that, though, which has nothing to do with money, was the effort it was going to take. I looked at my peer vice presidents at Amazon, and I was one, at that time, I was one of about 300 vice presidents, big company, right? Lots of leaders. And I could honestly look at some of my peers and say, okay, I am more talented, more gifted, harder working, lucky, or whatever than this person. But I could also look at others and say, and that person is more talented, more gifted, luckier than I am. And so I made an assessment of what will it take to compete with some of these very top people. And since you still work at Amazon, I can, several of the current uh, senior vice presidents were peers of mine at that time. The one I often point to is Peter DeSantis, a tech leader in AWS. I knew Peter fairly well. I worked with him, and it was easy to see, oh, this guy will be an SVP. I could compare myself and say, okay, what's it going to take to stay with him? It's going to take 10 years of really hard work. And what am I going to get for that? How do I feel about it? And there's nothing wrong with what Peter does or any of the other people who became SVPs from my peers, of which there's, quite a few. But of those 300 people, only 5 or 10 were going to make it. And so I was asking myself, what does it take to be in the top 2% of these VPs, the top 3%? And I started asking, do I really have that fire? And certainly money wasn't going to fire it. To just have a bigger house was no longer interesting.
I think it's also, I think money is one aspect. And as you said, the social ladder climbing, right? Like within the circles that you hang out. So for example, you would hang out in circles of SVPs and CEOs. So, for you, that is the benchmark that you're like, okay, can I step out? So it does take a lot of self-awareness to be actually like normalizing it across populations, right? Like you're like 0.001% of 1%, right? So, but day to day, you're sitting with those people and you're like, okay, how can I get there? So was there like, apart from that understanding of like the effort that it would take to get to the next step in the ladder, was there also an understanding of just the money from absolute value, just an age from an absolute value that you're like, okay, at this age, maybe when you were a director, and I think I heard your story, it took you like roughly 6 years to transition from director to VP. Were there moments before becoming a VP, or VP was that like kind of pedestal that you had in your mind that, okay, after that I can even think about it, but before that I'm I don't want to distract myself.
Yeah, so while I think other people's stories vary, what happened, it was very possible and that I was on track. And so I never really thought about things too much before that. But what happened was once I became a VP, then I thought to myself, okay, what now? And that's when I really started to look around because it had taken 6 years to get to director. So if I wanted to become an SVP, thinking, okay, well, this is going to be another 6 years. And then I started looking and I'm like, okay, 6 years is best case, probably more like 10. And look at my competition. Am I motivated for that? And I realized I wasn't. I realized that the idea of putting in 10 years towards this goal wasn't interesting to me. And I have to say, maybe if I had thought of trying to become a vice president and realizing it was going to take 6 years, I also wouldn't have wanted to do that. Somehow in that process, I wasn't seeing how far it was, nor how hard it was. And so then you're already climbing the mountain and you're going to finish. I consider it one of the best things that happened to me, that having become a VP, I woke up and said, okay, this is enough money. I've shown I can accomplish great things. What actually is going to give me meaning? What is going, as opposed to doing what it takes to climb the ladder only, what's going to satisfy me?
Right. And what would you say to like the most of the majority of the population, the number of VPs and directors are very limited at Amazon or in other big companies
Yeah.
which are doing great work. Like most people don't even see that path, right? Like to being a VP. That is like they know they had the realization what you had at VP to SVP. Most people had that at senior manager level. Or, they're like, okay, this is going to take 10, 12 years of my effort. And um is there any advice for them to like so one thing that you said was like to move to SVP, but you had other options, right? You could have been like a CEO of any other company.
Yeah.
Like, I think at Amazon, you always have a double jump at least when you switch out at such a high position. Compared to all those options, you still felt that, making entertainment was good. And I'm wondering, like, for people who are in the same, dilemma where they feel they're not creating impact, it's their personal objectives, they're trying to satisfy their own identity that oh, I've made it. For you, you realize that at VP level that you've made it. You it's not just a title, right? You all the past work that led to it, you felt that yeah, that is good. Now I'm ready to move on to the next chapter. Like, what are some other indicators that people can track?
Yeah. So first, I'll tell you a funny story about realizing you've done well. You may know when Google gives you directions and you drive somewhere, its last words when you get there are "You have arrived." And I'm very transparent, as you said. And I started joking with myself every time Google would say "You had arrived," I would say "Yes, I have." And so it was like this self affirmation of I've achieved what I need to. And of course, to some people that will sound grotesquely arrogant, and there is a piece of that. I don't actually fully mean it that way, though. It was a way of telling myself like I've done enough. Um, but there is. I guess that's part of it is defining. We all need money. We all the way work works, the way business works, higher level positions, whether as an individual contributor or as a leader, get paid more. So at some point, you have to define your own enough. Um, and maybe I could have defined mine earlier. I wasn't focused on what is enough until I got to this point, and then I'm like, oh, well, this is enough. So for other people, I would say what you can do better than I did is start thinking earlier about what do you want your life to be about. I, in some ways negatively, graduated from college, got a job, and got on a treadmill I didn't look up from and think about until later. I had a lot of early success, which whet my taste for climbing because I went from engineer to manager to director to VP in a startup all very quickly. And then I was kind of on this leadership path and I just stayed on it. So it was only later that I really started thinking about, oh, what do I want to do? And what we haven't touched on yet is the work I was doing at Amazon. I worked with great teams. I built household name products. I started what became Prime Video, Prime Gaming, Amazon's App Store. All of these are fine commercial products. None of them really help people. And so they entertain. I built basically entertainment products. And I spent my career in more or less the entertainment industry, music, things like that. At some point, I realized I want to do something that has a more direct positive impact. And it doesn't mean that showing people movies is bad or helping them play video games is bad. It's if you think of the classic sort of great things you can do, help families, save the environment, protect animals, help the homeless, whatever, kind of the classic list of charities. It's none of those. Cure cancer. And so I wanted to look at how can I do something that's more meaningful long term for people.
Yeah, and more direct as well. I think I had a similar realization like a couple of years back when I was in supply chain and Amazon. I was like, at one point, I realized that I actually don't care if somebody gets an iPhone a day faster. I was like, yeah, that does not, it's better if they get their iPhone later because to keep away from their phones. But at the same time, I realized in COVID how important those supply chain, that was the most, I think, inspiring moment of my life was working for Amazon during those COVID times, like figuring out essential versus non-essential. And to your other point, I overheard one of my directors the other day. He's a friend now. He's in the previous team, and he said that, you know what? Like I had set up a financial goal for myself, and I'm 5x of that number. And I was like, why don't you just go do something of your own? He's like, I don't know anything else that I can do. That segues me to the next question, Ethan. Like you at 50 have, left the Amazon job and started something on your own. And you're making $1 million in retirement, which is a dream job for a lot of, people listening. Talk to me about the skills that it took for you to transform and relearn everything, right? At 50, most people either want to just hone in into what they've been doing. Rarely people do such a pivot at that age. And that takes a lot of effort, like emotionally and energy wise, and of course, the skills you have to develop. Talk to me about that transition. How was that?
Yeah. So touching on what you said, so that you asked for advice for people, beware of the moving goalposts. So your friend has moved the goalposts where he defines success as some amount of money in the bank, and now he has twice that, three times. You said five times. I went through that as well. I set a retirement number and say, oh, I'm going to go do my own thing when I have X amount of money. And then you get to it and you start imagining bad things and you move it and you say, well, it would be a little bit safer with this much and a little bit safer. And I know so many people who've done this. I coach a lot of people and I talk to executives. One of the most awkward conversations I have with them is, are you willing to call yourself wealthy? And, you can go ask your friend this. Are you okay if I call you wealthy? Are you rich? And almost certainly that person will say, no, I'm not rich. And yet, if you know how much money they have, which apparently you have some idea, you'll be like, come on. Well, what's going on here is we've been taught that rich people are bad and that being rich is equivalent to being, Scrooge from the Christmas Story or some other sort of evil overlord. And of course, there are problems with the way we distribute wealth. So I'm not saying that, being wealthy is some great thing. The result is people who do have wealth fight like hell not to think of themselves as rich because rich is bad. And the result is
Right.
it clouds their mind. So why this matters, some of the people who are listening to this know you're not maybe rich today, but you make a lot of money, you're in a good company, you make a six-figure salary, you may make 200,000, 300,000 because you're in high tech. You will become rich. That's how time works. Also, we have to talk about culture here for a second. Many of these people are from they weren't born in the US, they're from poor cultures. Maybe their parents were farmers or vegetable sellers or owned a small business and they've been instilled with this drive to succeed. They don't know when to stop. And they don't have any notion of stopping, even though they have 100 times what their parents had. Why that culture matters, you have to stop and rethink and say, I'm in a different world. And what is going to be enough for me? So I realize I haven't answered your original question yet, but I think it's worth understanding that a lot of this is a mental game. And I have become comfortable, even more importantly, I have not become comfortable talking about myself as wealthy. I hate it. And every time I do it, I feel like somebody's going to judge me. But I
Right.
try to use the words rich and wealthy so that I normalize it, so that people can talk about it. And,
Right.
even as I'm saying this to you, I'm like, oh no, people are going to think I have hundreds of millions of dollars in a secret yacht. And I don't, but I do have a lot
Right.
of money. And
Right.
I want to normalize people understanding that when you get to a certain level, you have to think differently because you have to ask, okay, I have all this. What am I going to do with it? Now we can go back to your original question, which you'll have to remind me of, and I'll answer that.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, this sounds great. I mean, I love going on tangent. That's why this, we have this podcast. So I think almost it's a skill. This is a skill to understand how to be content. And this is not something you can figure out at a very high number because that is too late already. I feel
Yes.
that, like, for example, like I have to consistently remind myself, okay, I just have had a newborn. She's 9 months, 10 months old today. I have a beautiful wife. We have a family. As you said, like I have family in India and then she has family in Europe. I have to consistently remember to remind myself, okay, this is great. You build on top, you have more impact. That's even better. But this is good. So that, I think, as you said, is is almost a skill in parallel you need to develop. Otherwise, you lose what you said is that disconnect happens,
Mhm.
and then it's really hard to recover. Then it's almost just sounds like, like social signaling. Oh, I'm not rich, just as a social signaling, but they don't really realize it. The
So
other,
you
the
had asked
main,
me about
yeah.
pivoting, what it took to, I remember now, you asked me, how did I change and what did it take to reinvent myself? What happened was the first thing I did when I got to VP was I said, okay, what next? And I ruled out trying to become an SVP. So once you cross that out, then I had to sit with, well, what am I doing? In other words, if that's not my goal, what is my new goal? Because I didn't have one. It had always been, I'm a senior manager, get to director, I'm a director, get to VP. Well, if I'm a VP and I'm not trying to get to SVP, then what? And it leaves a big emptiness. So I started thinking about what do I love? And I realized my love was coaching people. I love teaching. I love coaching. I had thought early in my career I was going to be a professor. And interestingly, you talk about money. One of the things I realized early was professors don't make very good money. And so I was happy to go to industry because, as a young man, I really wanted to pay off debts and make money and have a house and a family. Um, I was left to ask, what am I going to do? And I spent a lot of time exploring that. And I realized pretty quickly that my gift is helping others with their career. I thought about classic charity, and I am not the right person to go around under bridges helping the homeless. And it's not because I don't believe in helping the homeless. It's not because I don't have empathy for people who are in distress, but that's not what I don't wake up every morning and say, I want to go out in the cold and rain and help this person. I do wake up
Right.
every morning and I love to help people with their careers. We're recording this at 8 a.m. in my morning, which is worth noting because I was happy to roll out of bed, put on a nice shirt, spend time trying to help others in this way. So once I realized that, then I ask a critical question, which is how am I going to get good at that? How am I going to do that full time? And it's something I think others can do, which is I started making a Venn diagram, overlapping circles in my head of what am I good at. And the three
Mhm.
circles in my head, I was working at Twitch, so I was working at streaming video games. I said, okay, I know social media pretty well from working at Twitch. I know how to speak on camera and how that works. Second, I knew I was a pretty good public speaker. I'd done a lot of presenting. And third, I knew I was a pretty good mentor. People liked my teaching. I had managed to get a lot of people promoted at Amazon. I understood careers. Alone, am I the world's best public speaker? I am not. Am I the very best at social media? Certainly not. Am I the very best coach? Maybe not. But when you overlap those and look at the
Right.
center, I realize, I'm among the very best who's a good speaker, also a good coach, also very comfortable with systems like Twitch and YouTube and LinkedIn and so on. In that center, I had a sweet spot. And I think that's an idea most people can use, which is look at your different gifts and talents and then start seeing, okay, where do those overlap to make me unique? That might be a place. So that's how I pivoted. And the last thing I
Hmm.
did is then I said, I'm still at Amazon. How can I use Amazon to help me? So within Amazon, I started mentoring more people. I started doing an internal stream where I was teaching. I used Twitch to do an external stream and start practicing my public speaking. So I built more and more aspects of what I wanted to do in the future into my day job.
Got it.
And if you're curious, there's a fun story from Beth Galetti's org where you may know at Amazon, you're not supposed to speak to the public without PR approval. Not allowed. Well, I wanted to do public speaking whenever I wanted. So I thought, how can I get around this rule safely? And I worked at Twitch. And of course, Twitch is a live streaming platform. And so what I did was I sent an email to the CEO of Twitch and I said, hey, to better learn our product, I'm going to become a streamer. you support that, right? I should use our product and stream. I know you do it. He's like, absolutely, of course you should be streaming. That would be fantastic. So then I set about becoming a streamer and using our own platform, which means recording public video whenever I want. And time went by and I was doing this, and some Amazon lawyer, I don't know who, I just know it was somebody from legal, saw me and said, hey, this guy Ethan's he's a VP talking to the public whenever he wants without PR. What's going on? And he reported me to someone who's now one of Beth Galetti's directs, Ian Wilson, who at that time was HR VP for AWS. And Ian called me up and said, I hate to be the cop, but I need to know what you're doing. Like, why are you doing this? Well, Ian's a very smart guy. So we had a kind of funny conversation because I said, oh, well, I'm just using our product. I'm not talking to the public. Really, I'm just using our product. I have to use our product. And of course, it's very hard for any Amazonian to say, well, you can't use your own product. And then, of course, I said, but, I got this approved. I have email from the CEO of Twitch saying, absolutely, you should be a streamer. So I have approval. And then the third thing I said is, and I'm very careful on my channel, I make clear that I don't discuss anything about Amazon. I won't discuss our stock price or any of these things I knew were kind of on their forbidden PR list. I said, I know the PR rules. Of course, I stay away from all that. Well, Ian's very clever, and I admire him for this. He said, okay, I see that you've thought about this. That was him saying, I see that you were prepared for my call. Like you knew this was coming. So he figured it out, and he said, what are you really doing? I said, what do you mean? But I said it that way, like, no. So he knew that we both now knew we were playing games. And I said, look, I love teaching and coaching people, and I see that one day that might be my future, and he's like, he literally said, okay, so you basically intend to quit and go hang out your own shingle. I said, no, of course not. Again, in like this lilty voice that meant yes, absolutely, but not what I literally said. And he's like, I got it. All right. Well, so be careful not to discuss those topics. Good luck, basically. And so we had this agreement. The reason I tell that story is I set myself up to use Amazon to jumpstart my new career. And lots of people do this. Now, at the same time, I maintained high performance inside Amazon. So I never broke any rules. I may have bent some, like I was bending the don't talk to the public without PR rule for sure, but I never failed in my Amazon job. At the same time, I was definitely using my Amazon job to set up my future. So the other lesson I would give to people listening to this is if you want to do something else, you don't have to cold turkey jump from I'm a corporate leader, I'm a software developer, I'm a marketer, straight to I'm this, independent person doing this other thing. I took baby steps. I built an audience on LinkedIn by writing. So when I left, I had a lot of these elements. I had a YouTube channel, I had a Twitch following, because you can do all of that. And that, I think, is how most people do it. They started as a side hustle.
Right. No, absolutely. And it's not really 0 to 1. I think that's what scares most people is like, how am I going to start this? This feels too much. And I think it's those little steps. And again, I think you said in a lot of interviews that you wish you had taken more risk. I think in a way, as an Amazonian and, as a vice president of Amazon, like I think you understood how to de-risk things.
Yeah.
So this was a way of de-risking things. So in a way, it might seem risky to layman like me, like from the outside, right? Like, oh, he quit his Amazon, and what if the newsletter didn't work, or what if their coaching didn't work? But actually, you were de-risking, and I think that is a job of a C-level to take those bets, but make sure that they're as de-risked as possible. So this was a great lesson for that.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I de-risk it in two important ways. One way was, financial. The other way was, did I like it? Because you have this, there are plenty of stories of people who have visions of something they think they want to do, and then they quit and they go do that thing, and like 6 months later, they're like, oh, I like this as a hobby, but actually as my job, that's hate having it as a job, and it's made me hate something I used to love. I read a story
Absolutely.
of a woman who loved to bake, and so her dream was to open a bakery. And then she opened a bakery and had to bake every day, for sort of customers who would complain, and it made her hate baking. And so there is value in, if
Yes.
possible, test it first.
No, absolutely. I learned an early lesson at the age of 18. I was preparing for getting into the Indian Air Force as a fighter pilot. And it's one of the hardest exams. Like, there's about 500,000 people who give that exam every year, and roughly 300 make it through. So the percentages are very,
Yeah,
very skewed. That thrill was so exciting that for 2 years, I didn't actually care about anything else. I just cared about clearing that exam because of that, skewed up ratio. And I did. I was like India's ranked 3 in that examination. But when I had to go in, I went to the academy and I was like, oh, this is completely different from what you do for the preparation, because the preparation is like a lot of excitement. Like you're going through very difficult scenarios and you're doing fighter simulation and stuff. But the academy, when you go there, it's a lot of grunt work. So at 18, I had to, like, I put all my eggs in a basket. Like, and I was like, okay, this is the only thing I want to do in my life. And I went there and I came back in a month and I was like so lost. It took me like, few months to realize that it's okay. Like, things you aspire to do, and once you get them, they might not be the same, like all that glitters is not gold. And that
right.
was a very big realization, but it did help me understand that, okay, like if I really put my mind to it, I can achieve things. So, again, as you said, like you have to put that into perspective as well. Um, and Ethan, talk to me about the power of networks. That's something that you've always emphasized on, and I think people might miss that point in other conversations. Wherein, talk to me more about what does it mean to have networks. Is it just a quantity of the number of people you're connected to on LinkedIn and other places, or is it those deep relationships that you build while building, like while working for them, wherein a manager saw your work or a peer saw your work and they're like, yeah, I can totally vouch for Ethan anytime in the career he needs that. But I'm wondering, like, could you talk more about the power of networking at a like from your level? Like, what does networking mean?
I can never tell you, of course, that having a more senior network of powerful people isn't useful. But I think people misunderstand network as it has to be close friends or it has to be powerful people. And what I think Twitch taught me is there is a tribe of people for every interest. And so the way I often explain it is if you love Star Wars and you love Wookiees, there is a set of people who think Wookiees are just as cool as you do. And so you can find your tribe of Star Wars Wookiee lovers. Now you would ask, what are they good for? Right? These must be people who don't have much to do, and we're going to stereotype and say they're laying in the basement covered with, Dorito dust and Mountain Dew cans. Well, maybe some of them are, but actually a lot of them are just like you. And the key is if that's your tribe, when you need a job, those people still have jobs and know other people. There's still a network that can help you, jobs or information or emotional support or whatever. And so the first part is understand your network doesn't have to be just powerful executives or other software developers or other lawyers. It's people who share a passion with you. The second piece is your network willing to help you? And that's partly about common interest, and it's partly about have you invested in them? Have you helped them in some way? Have you at least shown up to them so they believe you're a good person? So, one of the reasons my network is, I think, very powerful and capable is I've given away advice now for 6, 7 years. And so there are a lot of people like you, like others, who've read my stuff for years and they have a positive feeling towards me. They've never maybe reached out to me. I don't actually know they follow me. But if I have a need and that's the person who's like, oh, actually, I can do that, or I know the person, people feel good when they're able to help. And so that person who has the ability to help me with this special need, not they don't feel put upon or exploited. Instead, they feel like, oh, this person's helped me for years, and it's so easy for me to give back. So I will
Right.
give you an example, really powerful people, and I will give you an example that isn't power. Um, you may know I do work helping refugees and people driven out of Ukraine by the war. And early in the war, I wanted to get some suitcases full of relief supplies and medical supplies sent to Poland free by an airline. And so I reached out to my network and I said, is there anyone who works with United Airlines who could help get some suitcases sent to Poland for free? Well, I
Mhm.
got a note back from a friend who wasn't a close friend. He's someone I know, but we're not. And he said, uh, I know the chairman of the board at United, and I sent him a note. I'm putting him on this email. He will help you out. And so I got connected straight to the chairman of the board, which of course I wanted to get 10 suitcases on a plane. This is incredible overkill, right? This is using like an atom bomb to kill an ant. And so I wrote him and I said, look, I know you're the chairman. This is a complete waste of your time. Feel free to delegate me to anyone who can help, but thank you so much. And he said, no, it's great. I love to help. He was very gracious. And of course, the suitcases went for free. And that's an example, though, of you never know who your friends are connected to. I had no idea this guy knew the chairman. Okay, now we'll take an example that doesn't have power players. But the first thing to have learned in that is your network. You never know who knows someone really special. This guy did. Second, also an example about being in Ukraine. I came out of delivering medical supplies into a hospital in Ukraine, and British Air, and I think you're in London, right?
I'm in
You?
Czech Republic, in Prague.
Oh, you're in Prague. Okay. Well, so British Air is its own beast, a big bureaucracy. They had canceled my flight home. And
Mhm.
when I called British Air, because I had booked the flight through Expedia, they told me, we can't help you. You have to talk to Expedia. I call Expedia, and Expedia, the rep is like, well, we need to talk to British Air, and we'll get back to you in 3 days. And I'm like, my flight's supposed to be in 1 day. This is not helping me. So my wife said, why don't you use that network of yours? So I got on LinkedIn and I posted, and admittedly, it was a great sob story, right? Of I've just been delivering medical supplies to a war zone and now I can't get home. Can anybody help me? Is there anybody at Expedia who can help? Well, like 10 people in my network, because Expedia is based here in Seattle, work at Expedia. So 10 different people escalated this within Expedia, like, oh no, there's this guy and we're screwing him and we have to help him. Well, I got something that never happens, which is customer service called me. I got an inbound call. My phone lights up and it's like Expedia. And I'm like, hello? And they're like, yeah, this is Expedia customer service. We want to help you get home. But that's just regular people who worked
Right.
at the place. So the point is, the value of a network, it can do all kinds of things for you. And I could tell several more of these, like getting rescued from disaster, but you want to start building it early, because the bigger your network, the broader it is, the more you have helped your network, done something for them, not because you want to use them later, but because you're passionate about helping or sharing. Um, then when you do need them, those people will be like, oh, yeah, Ethan's great or Nikhil's great. We got to help him out. And I see that over and over again. Um, and of course, people come to me looking for help. And whenever, like, I got a call from a guy yesterday who wanted me to help find him um, some data science experts to hire. He's so I'll try and help him out. I have some ideas of people I can refer to him, and it's fun to help. That's the point. Is like this guy called me. He's basically asking me to do work for him, but only sort of. You can view it as
Right.
I'm doing work to I'm doing this guy's job for him, or you can view it as, hey, I know someone who wants to hire people. If I also know people who don't have a job, I can help both
Right.
people. So am I helping or am I doing his job? Well, the answer is actually both. And that's why it works.
No, that is completely relatable, and I did not know about the help that you are doing to the refugees in Ukraine. And Czech Republic is one of the biggest places they have entered, and I can see that impact in them being displaced. So thank you for all the work you've done. The other thing that I wanted to double click on, I think you mentioned that slightly, but just emphasizing that when you're not having an agenda, people can sense that very easily. So, for example, when you start putting out things for people, and again, you might not have impressions, you might not have as many likes, but people can see through a lot of information. They might not be able to pinpoint it, but when you don't have an agenda, for example, when somebody reaches out for you for help, you're not subconsciously thinking like, what am I getting out of it? People can read through that, and that I think really speaks to network. And that's when they start associating, like for example, Ethan with, like, if anything Ethan needs, I'll be the first one to help him out. That's how people start associating images. Apart from like those, regular social titles or wealth, they also can signal a lot of like goodness. So I think that is one way, and I think that is what worked for you as well, because you mentioned you have been introverted, starting off, and you've been working on that. But for an introverted to make such a network, I think it has to go to core values, right? The first part of the conversation where we had, where you figured out what you're good at and you just kept at it, and people can see through that very easily.
Yeah, I have some good friends, and my wife are even much more introverted. So I think a lot about how to help introverts. One of the great things about networking today, networking used to mean specifically going to events and cocktail parties and talking to strangers. Today, everything is reversed. You can post things that you care about, and the people who are interested in that will show up and introduce themselves to you. And so for an introvert, it can be easier. You still have to be willing to talk to people or at least message with them. But you don't have to take the risk of putting yourself out there and talking about, your love of Wookiee culture, and someone going like, "Well, Wookiees are dumb. What's wrong with you?" Instead, it will be only the people who care about what you care about who show up. And that feels a lot safer. The other thing is, of course, the whole world is our tribe now. One of the things I've talked about online is I have more South Asian followers and South Asian people in my network and in my classes than from any other culture. And that works because the whole world is available. And of course, there are a lot of technical professionals either in South Asia or from South Asia. And so I end up with this big following that's a different culture than mine that maybe 100 years ago would have been completely impossible, right? Some guy in Seattle would have never, known very few or no people, but now the whole world is available. And so I have to think, of course, about how do I coach someone from a different culture? How do I help them with their career? What do they need? But I can have this big world. Of course, I have people from East Asia and Eastern Europe and all over the world. And I love it because anytime I travel, I can meet up with locals,
Right.
which is super fun. I've done coaching on a ski slope in Switzerland because when I was going to Switzerland, I put out a post that said, "Hey, I'm going to be in Switzerland. Who wants to connect? And if you want me to coach you, maybe we can make a deal because if I coach you, I can give you a discount because I can call it a business trip." And they're like, I had a guy fly in from Spain in order to ski with me because he's like, "Well, I like to ski too, and I'd like to meet you." So win-win, right? Everybody wins.
Right.
But um, it's easy to build a network because you have like however many billion people are now online to share an interest with. It doesn't have to be just the people in your town or your apartment building or your office building.
And that's very beautifully put. So, Ethan, tell me one thing. You have coached hundreds of people, your newsletter is led by thousands. What do you think are the three most common patterns in people's life which prevents them from growing, or in their life or in their career? What are the three most common patterns that you've spotted in those interactions?
Um, so the first one is not realizing that hard work has a limit. We go to school, and hard work is a way to compete, and everything is just about getting the work done and getting high marks. And if you get a high mark, you get a grade and then eventually a degree. So we take this to work, and often you can get one or two promotions just by working hard because, like, oh, well, you get more skill, and let's take engineering. You start as depending on the culture, a fresher, or a fresh out, or a new hire, a junior engineer, or a college hire, and then we make you an engineer and then a senior engineer, and that can be done by hard work and expertise. But then things change, and beyond that, we actually expect you to have social skills and emotional intelligence. You need some ability to influence others and work with others, and we change the skills. And if you want to go very high, then suddenly you need to have strategy skills and
Mm.
you need to have influence and ability to speak and other things. I think the first mistake is people who've gotten far by being hardworking and reliable don't realize that at some point being hardworking and reliable is not going to make you a top leader. And it's not going to make you usually an entrepreneur either. You're not going to found your own company if all you're good at is getting things done. It's not enough. So that's the
Right.
first thing. The second thing is, this is weird, but people don't realize how much their like childhood culture or we all grew up with different, what I'll call damage. Our parents put pressure on us to succeed, and that makes us very competitive. Or I happen to grow up in a family that argued a lot, so I was very combative and critical. Other people grow up in a family. Well, at some point, unless you magically are a perfect person, you have these deep-seated bad behaviors or beliefs that you have to root out. And particularly in a lot of cultures, it's still considered weak to have a therapist or to see a counselor to try and work on who you are. One of the things, just like I talk about wealth, I've seen all sorts of different therapists and counselors at different points in my life to make me better, to help my mental game. And I think where the second thing that holds people back is not realizing in knowledge work, in technical work, it's all about your mind. And so anything you can do to make your mind healthier makes you better. And so worked on or eliminated different personality flaws. And somebody listening to this is like, oh, that means you're weak and I don't have those. And wow, that's pathetic that you would like let a therapist go through your childhood. Good luck to you. Because you have some sort of baggage almost certainly. And if you're not addressing that, it's just holding you back. So that's the second thing. The third thing is also cultural. And I mentioned it. I mentioned how many people I've worked with from South Asia, but it's bigger than it. It applies in South Asia. It also applies in almost any culture other than growing up in the U.S. if you work in the U.S. business culture, or Europe if you work in the European business culture. If you're from another culture, you have a culture conflict because the expectation at work, you're working in Europe, is dominated by white Europeans, probably men. And if you're in the U.S., it's dominated by people like me. Well, that culture has certain rules. It's outspoken, it's direct, and the cultures from around the world have different rules. They're quiet, they're respectful. I know some about Indian culture, for example, the touching of the feet to show respect to a great teacher. Well, what you're expected to do at work and what you grew up doing at home are very different. And learning how to do two different cultures, like at work, I have to be this one way to be effective. And at home, though, if I go home and treat my father or my parents like that, they're going to, be shocked. Like, look at the mouth on you, boy. What's happened to you? And it's going to be very different. And so learning to balance those two, that holds a lot of people back, because I'll tell a story. I have a friend. He's a retired 2-star general from the U.S. He worked with a guy from South Asia, an Indian, I believe, who was a doctor, and a very highly skilled doctor, and rose to, very high rank. It wasn't until they were both retiring from the Army that they were in the same room and they had a conversation, and I don't know how it came up, but the American said, I've never understood, you won't look me in the eyes. I always feel like you're lying to me or not truthful because you won't give me a good look in the eyes when we talk. And the other guy said, wait a minute, I can't do that. That would be horribly disrespectful. like I look down to show respect for your rank and station. And it blew this guy's mind because he had been frustrated all his life that this guy didn't respect him enough to look him in the eyes, when in fact what it was is he respected him so much he wouldn't look him in the eyes.
Right.
And that's what I mean, where what holds people back is not understanding those cultural differences. It holds, of course, both people back because it held back the guy I know because he spent all his time being frustrated with this person who was actually trying to show him the respect he thought he wanted. And they were just totally, neither of them was getting what they wanted, and it was culture. So that's the third thing, the huge learning to work across cultures, which is incredibly hard.
And also, I think, is it like I want to talk about some sort of like victimization mentality, wherein I think you mentioned that you've been laid off twice, you've been fired twice, and then you also mentioned in some of the interviews that pips can be dishonest because the process of laying off at Amazon and other companies can be dishonest because the managers have already made up their mind, and it might be driven by code and other things. So, like in your case, you realize that you were the focal point. Like twice it happened, so you were probably the one driving the decision. Whereas in other cases, it might not be. Like, how do you figure that out? That either you are the problem or you're not the problem, and when things go down, basically.
One way to know if feedback is true is if you happen to have a spouse, ask them. They will usually like. I mean, it depends if you have a significant other or whatever. They usually know you pretty well. But it's ask a few friends who will tell you the truth is one way. I was obnoxious. I was abrasive, and my friends were happy to tell me that. They just, they're like, yeah, you can be a real jerk. It's also, but it begins in asking, what part of this could I have? I read a story. I don't know if it's true. I read a story 20 years ago about how the law works in China in practicality, and that they rarely assign 100% blame to any one party. So I don't know if this is true, but the story went that there was a guy on a bicycle and he pulled up to a stoplight, and then a truck behind him came and hit him. And in court, they ruled that it was 90% the truck's fault, but 10% the bicyclist's fault. And he asked the judge, like, how can this be 10% my fault? Well, he was a foreigner like me visiting China, and the judge said, well, if you hadn't been in China, you wouldn't have gotten hit, would you? It's just a different way of thinking. The question to ask is, what part of this is mine? What could I have done differently? Because in almost every situation, you're at least 10% responsible. If I wanted to make a more sane argument, you could argue the guy on the bicycle could have been looking over his shoulder, knowing he was in traffic. There's always something else we can do. And so the victim part, making it the other person's fault and wishing that they would have fixed it, as opposed to saying, what could I have done differently? Even if this was 90% the truck driver, what 10% could I have done? Because you don't control the truck driver. You do control yourself. And that's the only person you control. I think the big lesson is you can wish all day other people would do the right thing and be fair and be just and not be biased. You don't control them. So one of the biggest things I try and teach people is you only control you. It may not be fair that you have to do all the changing, but if you wait around for fair, you will wait until the end of the world, and when the earth falls into the sun, and you will still be waiting.
Yeah, no, it happens a lot in relationships too, right? A lot of the relationship conversations are like, if the other person did this differently, then things would be better. It's almost never that, what can I do differently? Because that is completely in my control. But if that person changed a little bit, then the relationship would be perfect. And the other person says the same thing about this person. So
absolutely,
it's
one of the things I talk about in relationships, and these can be work relationships, but also personal relationships, we all keep score in our head, even if we don't try to. If you do something for your spouse at home, you keep perfect score because you know you did it. They may or may not notice. So you pick up your socks or do the laundry or bring home groceries or take out the garbage or whatever it is you do, you will notice, they may not. Meanwhile, they do something for you, they will definitely notice and you will not. So it is very possible to talk to two people who both love each other, and they will both say, well, I do about 70% of the work in this relationship. And they both believe it because the score in their mind is 7-3. But it's
Right.
not. The problem is the real score is 7-7, but each of them has
Right.
missed four of the things the other did. And this happens at work too, where you're like, my boss is such a jerk. He never gives me credit. Well, your boss
Right.
actually tries to give you credit, and they gave you credit for the things they noticed, but like they're busy. And their first thing
Right.
in life is not wake up and say, did I catch everything Nikhil did yesterday and send him a thank you note? They don't have time for that, and that's not their job.
Right.
But if you're
Right.
keeping score and you're like, I didn't get thanked, you will feel bad.
No, absolutely. Um, coming to the next question, Ethan. So, talk to me about career, family, and health. You've said that that trade-off is a three-way, and it's almost impossible to ace them all. Could you talk more about it? Because, for example, for people working in tech, they're earning well enough. So again, as you said, contextualizing, they're in the top 1%. They're probably young families having children, and they want to optimize for both. And it's always like a trade-off. If you meet somebody who's compromised their career, they'll always say that I wish I had more money or I had better career. But the people who've done the opposite, they're always complaining about the other side, like saying that grass is greener on the other side all the time. So talk to me about that. Like, why is acing them on not possible? Is it because the time is limited? Is it because the energy is limited? And also, like, maybe that's one of the reasons why people even would like to become vice presidents and directors, but really they don't want to.
You've probably heard the saying, comparison is the thief of joy. One of the problems you have, do you know this book, Sahil Bloom and the Five Types of Wealth? So if your readers don't, or if your viewers don't, Sahil Bloom wrote this incredible book about five types of wealth. And of course, family, relationships, time, and career, they're all one of these types of wealth. One of the problems is, let's say you have five friends and each one is optimizing a different thing. They will all look better than you at that thing. So you have one friend who's putting his whole life into his family, and you're going to look at him and say, oh, I'm such a bad parent. I'm such a bad mother. I'm such a bad father because look at them. And then you have this other person who's given up everything for career. And you're going to look at them and say, wow, look at all they achieve. So one of the difficulties is you might be able to be pretty balanced, but you're going to have people around you who look better at each individual thing. Humans are great at feeling guilt. And so when we're next to the friend who's good at work, we're going to feel guilty we're not doing more at work. And when we're next to the parent who's coaching the team and tutoring their kid and taking them we're going to feel bad about that. That's one problem. You do have to decide what are you going to be good at and what are you not going to be good at. It's funny, you said you've watched a lot of my interviews. I don't know if you caught one. It's got a funny line in it. I don't think I was a particularly good parent because I was so dedicated at work. I don't think I was a particularly good parent. So I was trying to be nice to myself, and I said I'd give myself about a C as a parent. And my friend Steve, who comes from, I think, Vietnamese heritage, he said, oh, a C, the Asian F. And, just like very harsh, like, yeah, C, that's an F, let's be honest. And it was very hurtful in a way, but also very truthful about the guilt I feel. Like, well, I tried to say, oh, I'm an okay parent. And he was saying, like, okay is really bad. And that's what you're secretly hiding. It's like, well, yeah, okay isn't good enough. I don't think you can be perfect in all these things. Even Sahil Bloom, who wrote the book, said the closest advice to perfection is different seasons. When you get out of college, maybe you work very hard to start your career. Then you have young kids and you better prioritize kids. Then you have another chance with like older kids. Maybe you can prioritize building wealth because you're in that part of your career where you're earning a lot and you can save a lot. And then you better start prioritizing relationships so that you're not alone in old age. But he kind of described working on the five types of wealth as phases. And I think
Right.
to some degree that's the best we can do, at least if you're trying to be perfect at all five, because perfect, there's always someone who's all in. I had the chance to interview a guy who's an Olympian. So his name is Justin, and he won the Olympic gold medal this last Olympics for rowing, for sculling.
Hmm.
And I listened to his routine, what he does. And he's trying to win in the next Olympics. So he's training right now for 2028, which means he's spending hours every day rowing and on his fitness. He also works as an investment banker. Well, this leaves no life left, right? Between working in an investment bank, training physically at Olympic level, and he's an incredible person, focused, driven, but like, there are trade-offs. If you want to be, the point I guess I'm getting at is I like to like work on my health and fitness. But if I compare myself
Right.
to this young guy who's in the Olympics, I am a fat slug, right? And like if I tried to catch up to him, even adjusting for age, I have to give up all this other stuff. And so you just have to avoid, because
Right.
if you care about health, you can't compare yourself to an Olympian unless that's what you want to
Absolutely.
be. And if you compare about
Yeah.
career, if you care about career, you've got to be careful to say, well, is my goal really to be, let's take, his name's escaping my mind now. The CEO at NVIDIA, who's really hot right now.
Jensen. Yeah.
Yeah, Jensen.
Jens. Yeah.
Right, Jensen. So if you take that as your model, you're probably going to feel bad about your career, or feel like, oh my God, how do I need to build $1 billion company and then have it blow up in AI. You can't do that because you'll go crazy.
Right. I think Charlie Munger has a famous quote that envy is one of the only seven sins that you have no fun doing it. And so I really like that. Uh,
I
talk to me
haven't heard
about
that, but that's right. That's right.
uh, talk to me about like going back and like if you had a magic wand and you could go back a few years, would you have used that advice of like having successful seasons instead of life? Like, would you think, as you said, like the guilt of raising a kids with a C or an F, like would you have spent more times and skipped some of the meetings? Is that something that could have done? I know I see you're not a particular person who dwells in regret, but I'm just wondering, would that have changed had you known that earlier or felt that earlier, or if you saw that yourself becoming who you are right now at 50, this person who is really willing to give out to people, would you think you would have done something differently in the past few years?
It's a great question. You're right. I don't spend a lot of time on regrets. Um, I think I would have tried to do some things differently, but remember I talked about how I'm not the right person to go. I don't feel I'm the gifted person to go under a bridge and help homeless.
Right.
Um, we all have unique wiring, and I'm not well wired to be a good parent to young children. I'm, you know, the patience, I'm not a very patient person. And young kids require a lot of patience because you're going to sit a lot of time, playing simple games with them, which are very important to them. I'm not very good at that. I'm not gifted at
Right.
that. And so part of it is admitting what you're good at and not good at. And I can at least say with satisfaction, I knew myself well enough that before my wife and I adopted, I talked to her and I said, you know me, I know me. I'm not actually very good parent material. Are you like, so if we go into having a child to be good parents together, it's going to be like more on you. That some people will hear that and be like, what a jerk, you know,
Yeah.
maybe, but also at least self aware and honest so that we can make a decision together where my wife said, okay, yes, I understand that like you don't have much talent here.
Right.
And meanwhile, the rest of the deal then was she would stay home. She would quit her job and stay home, and I would go do what I did, which was earn all the money. So when you ask, would I go change things? I can't tell you. What I can tell you is, of course, I wish they were magically different, and probably I would try some different things. But I don't know, as if you gave me my life to do over again, could I
Right.
raise my C that's sort of an F? I don't know. Because,
Yeah.
I also, to go to something less judgmental for a minute, um, I'm a terrible artist, meaning if you ask me to like draw a picture, you don't want me on your team in the game Pictionary or anything else. It's going to be terrible. And I could spend a whole lifetime trying to be a better artist, and I don't think it would get there. So sometimes I do think you can have regrets or wishes, but it's important to know like that just isn't what I was made to be good at. There's this old movie, some people will have seen it, called Chariots of Fire. And it's about Olympic runners from the 1930s. But one of the runners is also a priest. He's a preacher, and
Mm.
someone says to him, like, isn't it inappropriate for a man of God to be competing and trying to win the Olympics? Isn't this wrong? And he says, no, no, God made me fast. Like that's part of who God made me. And when I run, I can feel his pleasure. Like I know I'm doing
Right.
the right thing because I'm using this gift I have. So basically, shut up and stop judging me. Well, you have certain things that you're good at, and that's how God made you. And you have certain things that you're never going to be good at. You can
Right.
cry about that or you can move on. I've chosen to try to be, I'm a better parent as an adult where I can be a friend to my children and an advisor and a coach to things I am gifted at. That's my chance to be an A is in their adulthood. So, but you got to recognize, I was never going to be great at playing with dolls. It just wasn't going to happen.
I love the fact that how I hear and imagine your professional life. It is very similar to your personal life because of the fact that you're a deal maker. And secondly, you're always de risking. You're still de risking. I love that fact. Talk to me about, young professionals. Like, I think I feel that I think one term that could describe your whole career and your life has been, you've been like resilience is part of it, but I would say it's anti fragility. I think you have anti-fragility. I think if I had to explain in a few seconds, would just mean that it's not just robustness that, when things go bad, you sustain them, but you actually get stronger. You have become stronger through those, low lights in life. And talk to me about, would you have some things to say to people like who are trying to build this anti-fragile life and they're working in corporate? Imagine they're in their 30s. Again, they might want to level up and climb up, but also they might want to just diversify as you have done. Like, in the towards the end of your career, you did diversify a lot and you were like trying to test out waters in different fronts and you were figuring out what else can I do. Um, I want to understand more. I think money is definitely one big, placeholder in that. Once you have that, you have a lot more leverage. But is there more or talk to me more about the whole thing?
Yeah, so anti-fragility, it's a fascinating concept, and it takes a little while. The author who created it, Taleb, has to explain. He has to call it anti-fragility because we don't have a word that means the opposite of fragile. Like we have weak and strong and light and dark, but there's no equivalent pair to not fragile. Um, and so you're right. I learned a different quote long before I learned of Taleb's work in Anti-Fragile, which was that which does not kill me makes me stronger. And um, it's a really pressure, pressure and difficulty definitely seem to build character and forge people and give them perspective. And there is some truth that people who've never suffered don't have the same depth. Um, so this is difficult because you don't wish suffering on anyone. But I guess for people who find themselves in difficult circumstances, there are a couple of philosophical things I would say. First, you will get something out of it other than just pain. As long as you survive it, you will learn things,
Right.
you will grow stronger, you will grow tougher. So, one thing is when bad things happen, you can at least know that something good will probably come of it, and that belief may help you. The second thing is the Buddhist concept of this will pass. Everything in life is transient and temporary. No matter what's wrong in your life, it will end. Either it will kill you, which is one type of end, or it will go away. So, I've talked publicly about being divorced. It was a horrible time. And I was extremely depressed, and, very upset, but, it ended. And I succeeded more in my career, and I got remarried to a wonderful woman, and I have a great life now, and I'm super happy. Is that memory still painful? Absolutely. But it ended. And so I think if you're suffering or if you're struggling, the biggest thing to realize is, who do I want to be after this?
Right.
When I got divorced, my mother was quite worried about me. And I remember she called me and, like, are you going to be okay? What's going to go on? I said, look, 5 years from now, I will be remarried and this will be different. Like, I had a vision of, it's going to take time, but I know this will change and I will be in a different place. And those things came true. I think it's recognizing that what's bad now won't be bad forever is part of the way to be anti-fragile. We tend to think first that our misery is unique. No one's
Right.
miserable the way I am. No one's ever suffered the way well, like, bullshit. And second, that it will never end. And neither of those things are true. And so, that won't make it more pleasant, but it might make it more survivable.
Ethan, you've said in previous interviews that in big tech, people often, and you yourself have often prioritized achievable goals over, real value or real impact. Talk to me about the current trends in FANG. Like, do you think there are leaders still there who are like prioritizing real impact? And like, how can a person like, mid-level or mid-senior level can spot these leaders in organizations or as, founders? Because, I'm wondering, like, from your experience, what has been the case? And because working for people who are truly passionate about real impact, it doesn't feel like work. I mean, there's a lot of hours spent, there's a lot of grunt work, but it definitely feels that you're pursuing something beyond yourself, beyond your manager. There's a true goal, whereas it's quite the opposite for just meeting the targets. It does help you like grow, progress in life. That's important, but it definitely feels like work because you start asking the questions quite soon: is why am I doing this?
Yeah, so the key concept here is alignment. First, does your leader have an actual mission, or are they just collecting a paycheck? Do they have something they care about enough that they would do it for free, or they would do it even if it's going to fail or even if it's hard? Usually important to work for a missionary, not a mercenary, is how it's described. So someone who has a goal that they care about more than just their rating or whatever. Second, is that goal then aligned with your own? So part of it is you need to know your own goal. Do you have a greater mission? Um, it could be that your mission is get promoted to the next level because your family needs more money, or for your own soul, you think you do. That's fine. But you've got to make sure that your mission is pretty close to that of your manager, because otherwise you're going to have continual problems because they're going to do things for their mission that work against you. Let's even take, for example, I have a goal. I want to create a new product that's going to be revolutionary. You have a goal, get promoted. Well, if the best way to my goal is to hire someone in over you, if I think like, well, I can work on Nikhil and I should and I want to and I believe in him even, but that's going to take a year and I need better right now, I'm going to hire in over you. Versus my mission is to grow and develop the team under me, and I'm very passionate about that. I may look at you and say, well, we're going to suffer a little bit for this year while Nikhil is learning, but that's okay. He's going to be awesome when he gets there. And so just that simple decision of, am I more focused on maximizing the team right now or maximizing the team in the future? My mindset determines how good I am for you to work for. Now, other people, see, let's say I'm very focused on the right now. That might be bad for you, but there's someone else who's also very focused on the right now and wants to be successful today and doesn't care about career growth. They care about, did it ship? That person may be right for them. And so it's finding who's the right fit for you. I have worked for several managers I struggled with and other people love, Or I had one manager that I loved, and one of my best friends was like, he's mediocre. It's simply the difference of I wanted a supportive mentor, and that guy was a incredibly supportive mentor. My friend wanted someone who is smarter than him at retail, that knew more about Amazon retail and could teach him. And our boss couldn't do that, our shared boss.
Right.
So my friend was like, he's fine. He's a nice guy, but he's not really that good. And I'm like, he's amazing. He takes so good care of me. Same boss, same behaviors, different goals. My
Because
goals were aligned,
working for
his
people
weren't. So
who are
that's
truly
the
passionate
advice.
about
The
real
advice
impact,
for
it doesn't.
listeners, you got to know what you want and figure out, is this the boss for you? It doesn't mean they're necessarily, there are bad bosses, okay? There are bosses who are evil and exploitive and dictators and who scream and yell and all these things. That's one category. But then there's bad bosses for you, which is a style thing, which, by the way, probably makes you a bad employee for them. It does, like, no one's actually evil. It's just there's a mismatch.
Super. Thank you so much, Ethan. And I'm just wondering, like, where can people find you? And I want to know, like, personally, what's next in your life? Is there something exciting coming up, or is it just, scaling up things that you've been doing?
Well, so the easiest way to find me is my website, ethanevans.com. Just my name, pretty easy. And also LinkedIn, I'm Ethan Evans VP, very easy. As for what I'm doing that's exciting, of course, the whole world is about AI now. In a few days, I've built a AI model of myself using all the writing I've done for many years. A lot of people think it's very amazing. It's available 24/7. We're releasing a new version in a few days that's going to have even more writing. Hundreds, it's going to have my notes and observations from hundreds of executive coaching sessions. So it's going to be much better at executive coaching. And it's going to have memory. The current model doesn't remember between sessions, so you're fresh with it every time. This one will have institutional memory and will learn to know you, Nikhil, and what you need. And so I think that's the new frontier is how can I make my coaching available 24/7 to anybody, anytime? That's pretty amazing, I think.
You've had such a illustrious career, and you're totally about giving back. I think a lot of people see you as a role model from all the different angles, like from the titles, from the money aspect, and also just a genuinely, happy and nice person who's willing to give back to the people. Is that the legacy you would like to leave? Is that something you think about? Like, what is the legacy that Ethan wants to leave and work backwards from, as I say at Amazon?
Of course, I'd love to leave a big, generous legacy. Um, be remembered fondly. I think, yes, my path for that. I I think of my mission. I say my mission is to pay forward my good fortune by helping others achieve career success and satisfaction. Um, and the reason I want people, the satisfaction part is important because people come to me usually wanting career success. How do I get to the next level? Because that's such an obvious problem, challenge, and it feels very finite. And I try to get to know them and start asking them, what will success look like for you? Like, what will satisfaction be where you feel it's enough and you're happy? Because I think everyone eventually reaches my point where they're like, okay, I've done enough. Then what? And I try and help them see that question, then what, is coming. So I would like my legacy to be that I helped people not just succeed, but also be joyful, be content, be happy, be giving back themselves. What I really want is to create more people who don't do what I do, but who do help others in some way.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Ethan. I really absolutely love this conversation. I love researching, for this conversation. And I just feel it's such an honor to, sit down with you. I often joke with my family that I've worked for Amazon for 10 years and I've never had a VP, one-to-one. And I'm like, this is my podcast that I can sit with VPs. This is again comes back to like giving back, and you just open up channels and you don't know, who you know until you start, building that I am happy to give out. So, Ethan, thank you so much. If there's, anything I can do for you, I'd be, very, very happy to do that. So do let
See,
me
the
know. And
network works. You'd be happy to help. That's the network.
I would love to I would love to help you. Like I've, as I said in the starting of the call, like I can help you with the cameras or any of the, technical setups. And I work as a scientist in AI. So anything that I can offer my help for, I would be just very excited to work with you. Thank you so much, Ethan. It was a very good conversation. And I certainly gained a lot from this conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome, Nikhil. I gained a lot as well. And I appreciate you asking about something few people talk about, which is the why. People don't think enough about the why of what they're doing. And I don't condemn them for it. They're busy. But I appreciate you asking and helping me share some of the why.
Thank you so much for listening to this conversation with Ethan today. I truly enjoyed it. I think I learned a lot from Ethan. His conversations are truly insightful to me. I think I'll take a few more days to really realize what she has said. So if you enjoyed this conversation, please share, like, and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening in today.